Hello, I'm Ross, and I'm going to show you how you can create a carousel using modern web standards. We're going to use the CSS scroll snap and progressively enhance the carousel with some buttons using JavaScript. So let's get into it. First, we'll set up the carousel with just HTML and CSS. We're going to use custom elements, and we're not going to use JavaScript yet, but we are going to use the custom element selectors for our CSS. I'm using placeholder images with lorem pixum. If you haven't heard of it, it's like lorem ipsum but for images. So check that out. We'll copy in our HTML. We can take a look at that. So you can see we've added some HTML. We have a carousel container that contains carousel content, and we've added an ARIA label just to tell screen readers that this is an image carousel that they're looking at, and some alt text just saying that these are random images that are being generated. So next, let's improve it, and we can style it with just some CSS. We're going to use Flexbox for both of these. For the container, we're going to align the items to the center, which will be useful for when we add our buttons in later and provide a gap between them. And then same thing for the content, it's going to use flex with a gap. We're going to have a little padding on either side vertically using the padding block property. And we're going to provide the overflow x equal to scroll, which will make it so the images just scroll from left to right inside that carousel content. And then we'll use the child selector to select all of the elements within the carousel content, and we're going to use CSS nesting here since this is now supported in all browsers. So this is shorthand for the parent element, which would be the carousel content, and we're going to say each of those is going to have a 200 pixel width and height and have a border radius of 25%. And let's see what that looks like. So now you can see we have our image carousel, and it works without JavaScript and scrolls from left to right. We can make this a little better by adding the scroll snap property, and this will make our images automatically center to the point that the user scrolls to. And I can show you how that looks. So now that we've added in the scroll snap type X, which means we're scrolling along the X-axis, and we want the scroll snap to align to the center, you can see that when we lift off of the scroll, our image will automatically center to the closest scroll snap point on here. So it's a nice feature to ensure that the image you're scrolling to is always visible. Next, we can progressively enhance the carousel with JavaScript using custom elements. Many design systems include buttons for a carousel for the user to click on to scroll instead of using a scroll bar. So we can provide this as a progressive enhancement with web components that use JavaScript. So we'll create a carousel trigger element that uses a direction attribute that specifies which direction the content should scroll. So in this case, we're just going to specify either backward or forward for the direction. So let's add in our triggers, and I want them to be right before the content and right after the content. So for our content, we're going to give it a method. It's just going to have one method called shift. And what this method will do is take in a direction, forward or backward. It will calculate how far it needs to scroll using the total scroll width divided by the total number of elements within that content. So if we had a width of 100 and 3 elements, each time this would be scrolling 33 pixels. So, and then once we have the scroll length, we're going to scroll by the direction. If it's forward, we're going to scroll by the scroll length. If it's backwards, we're going to subtract the scroll length. And then we'll define it to the custom elements registry. So our carousel content element that's in our HTML will now have this method. And we can see how that works here. So if we run document.querySelector and get the carousel content element, we can run .shift, and you can see that our shift method is expecting a direction here. So let's say forward, and you can see that that shifted our content forward. So we want to be able to call this by clicking on our trigger elements. So next we need to define our triggers. So first, the trigger elements will have a get method that returns the direction that the user passed in. So this uses the get attribute method, and what that does is it will find this attribute, which is direction, and return the value of that attribute. Next, we'll have another getter method, and it will return the content. So we're going to say this .parent element, so it's going to go up one element, and then it'll find the carousel content within the same parent. So we want to be able to call that shift method on our content. Next, when the component is mounted to the DOM, this connected callback function is going to be called, and we're going to set the role of this element to a button, ARIA hidden to true, since screen readers will be able to move through the images like normal. They don't need to be able to focus on this. And then set some styles with classes. Our inner HTML is going to be an icon provided by Lucid Icons. Check them out if you haven't already. If the direction's backward, we're going to rotate the icon 180 degrees. And then we're also going to add an event listener that says when this is clicked, we're going to shift the content according to the direction attribute. And finally, we'll also define the trigger to the custom elements registry. And you can see that this is appearing. I need to edit my attribute to ensure that that last button is forward instead of backward. So now you can see that button has flipped over, and it will shift the content forward and backward. Finally, if JavaScript hasn't loaded, we do not want to show these buttons since they will not work. We can use CSS to hide the triggers if they are not defined in the custom element registry. We'll also add a scroll behavior smooth property to ensure our carousel smoothly scrolls to the next image when the trigger is activated. So altogether, our carousel now works like this, and smooth scrolly between them when we click between the buttons. And if we disable JavaScript, you'll see that our carousel still functions as normal, but without the buttons being loaded. So we've now created a carousel component using web components and CSS scroll snap. Let me know if you enjoyed this video. Have a great day.